Welcome to the Old Soul, New Soul Astrology Podcast with Robert Glasscock. I'm Thomas Miller, just getting things kicked off here with a conversation that is one of the things that Robert does the best. Did you know that you can ask the chart a question of relevance in your life, of such importance that you want to take it to, as Robert says, space and time, to get an answer from the planets to help guide you here on Earth? And there is a correlation. This is all called Horary Astrology, and this man is brilliant with it. And Robert, I thought it was time that we finally talked a little bit about Horary Astrology.
Well, thank you for that very intimidating introduction.
You can handle it.
Okay. That's making a lot of promises. I love this branch of astrology, Horary Astrology, which really means of the moment, a chart for the moment. It's the birth chart for a question. Fascinating. One example I can think of that I use all the time in these horary workshops, years ago, a few years ago, on Christmas Eve, I was, it was about dusk, and I was headed for a party. And I was driving a Jeep Grand Cherokee, an old one by that point. For 20 years I had it. And I started up a hill doing, 30 miles. And suddenly the Jeep just died. There was no power steering. I didn't have an engine, just nothing. My headlights were still on, so I knew it wasn't the battery. And luckily there was a street immediately on the right starting up this hill, and that street dipped down into a residential area. So I was able to I had enough momentum to steer off of this main road and coast down into the residential area and stop by some shrubbery in front of somebody's house. And I phoned for the towing company. This was on a Sunday. And I thought, well, I'll have them tow the car to my mechanics and leave it overnight, and I'll call him and let him know what's going on. So I phoned him and told him. And then while I was waiting for the tow truck, I thought, what is wrong with this car? Is it going to cost me an arm and a leg? So I took out my iPhone, and I have a program on it called Ephemeris, which is a wonderful program. It's almost like having a complete astrology software program on your iPhone. And in less than 1 second on that program, I could type Sky Now, and instantly I had this horary chart. And if you know where to look, and that's the key to horary, you have to know what house rules the question. Well, it was simple to me. I wanted to know about the car's health. Well, just like your own health is shown in your natal 6th house, the car's health is shown in the 6th house of the car. Well, what house rules cars? 3rd, transportation. So I knew immediately that the original 8th house becomes the 6th house from the 1st house of the car at the 3rd. And in looking at that 8th house, I saw Neptune in Pisces. And I thought, oh, it's got something to do with liquids, the fuel lines. Neptune in Pisces in the 8th. All right. So I wondered if it was going to be expensive to repair. And I looked at this and thought, well, no, it isn't going to be. The second from the car, the question was about the car, 3rd house. The money involved in this situation is the second from that, and it's ruled by Venus and Sag. And Venus is conjunct Mercury in about 9 degrees. So I thought, well, it's not going to be expensive to repair the car, and yet it looks like it's going to be about 9 days before I get this thing back, according to these 9 degrees. I could not figure out. Well, I did. I towed the car in. We left it at the mechanics, and one of the people from the party came and picked me up there and went to the party. And that night at the party, the city was blanketed with one of the heaviest snow and ice storms it had had in decades. Power went out all over the city. I wound up spending 2 nights with the hostesses in her house. This was an old friend, so there was nothing going on. The house inside got down to 19 degrees. And finally, the third night, I said, I'm going to a hotel. I can't, some of the power, it was just too cold. Well, it has turned out the power was out around the city for something like 5 days. So the mechanics couldn't even begin working on the car for a week. And I was not the first car in line. So it did take 9 days. Turned out to be the fuel pump. I think it cost me $225, and that was all. But this is the value of horary astrology, because it's the closest I think astrology comes to being psychic. So that's one example. I have another one that I just, a few years ago, had been leasing a Honda and the main reason I leased cars is because I just don't want to get stuck with major repairs. Well, I was a year and a half into this Honda lease. It was a 5-year lease. And I get this letter from Honda Corporation, dear preferred customer. And I thought, yeah, I'm preferred, right? We have a special offer for you. You can turn in your car today and drive off in a brand new Honda for no money down. Great. So I looked up these early termination lease offers online, and depending on how you drive a car and how long you keep it, they can actually be good for the consumer. Well, I keep a car a long time. So then I asked the horary question, A, should I take advantage of this early termination offer? B, should I lease the new car if it's a yes answer? Or C, buy it? Well, I looked at and here you go. What house would you think would rule this question about a car? And I've used this in horary practicums before. A lot of people say, well, it's about the car, so it's the third house. And I say to them, is it really? You have to really listen. Is it about the car or is it about the money?
It's about the money.
It's about the money. So I was looking at the second house, and that becomes the first question in a series of questions. A, should I take advantage of this early termination offer? That's ruled by the second house. The next question, should I lease the car? If the answer to the first question was yes, is the third from the second. It's a sibling question to the first question. So the first question was ruled by the second house of money, and then you go to the third house from that for the next question, which was, should I lease this car? And it said, no, absolutely not. So I went to the next sibling question, which is the third from the fourth house, which is the sixth house. That was the question about to buy it, and it said, yes, buy it. Boom, that's all I've done this so long, I don't even think about it anymore. I went in the next day, we test drove a car, we had all the financing set up. And so I'm signing. Now I go into the private office of the finance guy, and he remembered me from the year and a half before when I got this Honda. And he looked over the papers. He said, "Why are you leasing this?" And I said, "I don't know. It's just what Mo set it up. I guess he thought, I wanted to keep the payments the same. I don't know." And he said, "Let me ask you about your driving habits," which he did. And he said, "Bob, you don't want to lease this. You want to buy this." And I'm thinking that's exactly what astrology said. And I said, "The only reason I lease these cars is because that way I don't have any major repair bills." He said, "Easy. I'll fold in a 10-year extended warranty. Frankly, it is better than the factory warranty. It's bumper to bumper. Fold it into the price of the car, and you don't have to think about it in another minute." So, of course, that's immediately what I did, knowing full well that the horoscope had said, yes, take advantage of the offer, but don't lease it, buy it. And in that case, the finance guy pushed me in the direction astrology had said. So those are a couple of practical ways that this can be invaluable.
Well, I have one that I could throw in here that happened just last week. I was over in Asheville doing a little shopping for the day, and I happened into this one store, and there was an item in there that would have been several $100s that did I need? Absolutely not. I've lived a long, full life without it. Would it have been fun every now and then to play with as a toy? Yeah, it probably would have been. So I was contemplating whether to get this particular thing. I'm not going to mention the details around it more than that. But I did some muscle testing around it, which is another technique that I use. And I got an inconclusive answer. It was like it could be yes, it could be no. And in my little muscle testing sequence, I asked, well, would there be a negative from this if I happened to purchase it? And it was no. The muscle testing said no. So I stepped away from it, left the store, and out in the parking lot, the thought, ask the chart. And it was something that I felt important enough, and I was willing to do whatever the chart said. That was going to be the cast the vote thing, right? So what I did was look in the fifth house, because it was A, recreational, and B, I guess you could say luxury item.
Yes.
And if you'd like to follow along with this, the chart of this horary that I cast is in the show notes. So that chart at that hour had Aries on the cusp of the fifth house. So obviously opposite that then is Libra.
The opposite house is the immediate outcome in general. What it really shows you, the opposite house from the question shows you the total environment around the question itself, and therefore what we call the immediate outcome. And so you take the rulers of those two houses, whatever house rules the question and whatever planet rules the opposite house of the environment's response to the question or the immediate outcome of the question, and you look to see what aspect those two planets make. And so in this case, keep going.
So Aries is ruled by Mars. Mars, we know currently, for those who are following along with us in real time here, we know that Mars is currently in Gemini, and that Libra is ruled by Venus, which currently is at the very last 10 degrees, the last decanate of Virgo. Those two signs, we don't even have to worry about where the degrees are. We just take the signs. That's a square, and a square means no. That's so right. I knew right then my answer to buy or not buy was no.
Yep. So, in horary has very specific rules. We don't use orbs in the same way in horary. A planet in horary is allowed to move the entire span of the sign that it is in to make aspects. It cannot leave the sign it's in to make aspects. So you're absolutely right. So you look at the question, the ruler of the question, which is Aries and Mars, and then the opposite house shows you how that question sits in the world. It's the immediate outcome. It's the sum total of the outer environment's response to the question. And that's ruled by Venus. Well, Venus and Mars are square each other. And in horary, a square or an opposition, you only use the 5 Ptolemaic aspects in horary, which are the conjunction, the sextile, the square, the trine, and the opposition. So a square gives you a no answer. It simply says that the question, and obviously it involves money and the practical uses of it, because Venus rules money. It's in Virgo and it squares Mars. So it would have been an expense that you wouldn't have felt good about.
We're human, right? We are human.
And you bought it anyway.
No. But what I did do, I drove down to the grocery store, which is about, quarter mile away, just down the road. And I thought, as I was coming out of the grocery store, I thought, I'm just going to look at the money side of this. So I did exactly what you said. I looked at the second house. And you can see from the chart here that the second house has Capricorn on the cusp. That's Saturn. And opposite that is Cancer, which is ruled by the moon. And it's very easy to see that with Saturn in Aquarius and the moon in Leo, they are opposite each other. It was checkmate. This was no and no.
And no.
So listen, here's the rest of the story. I went home, unloaded my stuff, and it was on a day off. I was taking the day off intentionally. So the thing else that I love to do, as you know, because you've been the recipient of some photographs from up there, I love to go up on the mountain and watch the sunset. So I drove up to the little area, the overlook up there off of the Blue Ridge Parkway that I love so much, and watched a gorgeous sunset. And on my way down the mountain, And by the way, as you're coming off of the parkway there, headed back into town, the sign says 9% grade. And if you know anything about mountains, that's steep.
Yes, it is.
And it winds its way down about 6 miles down to the little town where I live. As I started down that hill and I hit my brakes, I heard a grinding noise in the front end.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew, because I was anticipating replacing the brakes in December when I had this major service repair scheduled already. And the service tech told me that the brakes should be fine until December. So I knew what it was. I wasn't worried about what it was. I just had to go back to Asheville the next morning to get my brakes fixed. Do you know that the brakes cost almost to the penny? You can't make this stuff up, folks.
And if you go back to the original question, Thomas, ruled by the fifth house and the idea of making this so-called luxury purchase, the immediate outcome or the response of the environment to the question is ruled by Venus in Virgo of practicality. Venus is money. Virgo is get real, be practical. And it's in Virgo, and there you go, squaring the Mars, which is your brakes. So that's wonderful. The original response to the question is, don't make this purchase. It's not practical. It's you're gonna wind up regretting that you did. And of course you did instantly. You would have, because you had to spend the money on the brakes. That's funny that they were almost exactly
almost to the penny.
Price. Yeah.
So here's the other thing that just resonated for me in the moment of that revelation of, oh, wow. And when I heard the noise in the front end, don't you know, I remembered what I had cast in the chart about 6 hours before.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, and my initial response was, thank you so much. But the other piece of this, the other piece of this is that if you're going to take a question to the sky, be willing to do what the sky tells you to do. This is not dabbling. This is not an opine, to say, well, let's see what the stars think about this, and then I'll decide. This is the kind of thing that if you're going to take a question up to space and time and for the universe, for God, for higher source to pontificate on your behalf and give you direction, the best mentality and mindset to have when you go into it is that you're going to do what it tells you to do.
You are reminding me of a client that I had probably 45 years ago. Unforgettable. He was a Japanese businessman, incredibly rich and successful. And he said to me, I have never let astrology stop me from doing something in business that I wanted to do, but I have absolutely let it delay me for a better time. That's how he used it. And I thought, what a smart man. If you've got a business dream and a business project you want to accomplish, go for it, but use astrology in a practical way. Sign the documents, incorporate or whatever you need to do under more favorable conditions. I thought that was very smart.
That reminds me of...
I have let astrology delay my doing it. And I thought, yeah, that's the approach.
Well, that reminds me of the J.P. Morgan quote, and I don't know if he said it or not, but it's a great quote and a good guy to attribute it to, that millionaires do not need astrology. Billionaires do.
Yes, true. I read that same quote.
All right. Well, thank you for giving us a glimpse into this and for sharing and swapping stories with me on it. This was fun. And, Robert and I are talking about activating a horary class so that you can learn this kind of thing. That's something that's on our 2023 agenda. And we'll see if we are able to pull that together. But it is certainly on at least our whiteboard to be able to teach this so that you can do it for yourself. If you'd like to contact Robert for a reading, all of the information there is in the show notes, a link to our YouTube channel and our Discord channel to continue the conversation from here. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next time on the Old Soul, New Soul Astrology Podcast with Robert Glasscock. Thank you so much for listening.